la ansiedad y la apatía se oculten, donde la ansiedad y la impaciencia se refugien, donde la ansiedad y la impaciencia se refugien. Aliviando mis pesares va la hoja de papel, convirtiéndose en aliada de los asuntos del ayer. Ligerita quiero ser, ligerita quiero ser, así de blanca como una hoja de papel, así de blanca como una hoja de papel, de los asuntos del ayer. Ligerita quiero ser, así de blanca como una hoja de papel, así de una hoja en blanco. Es lo que yo te pido, donde la soledad y el corazón se juntan, donde la soledad y la conciencia se dibuje, donde soledad y la conciencia se dibuje. Aliviando mis pesares va la hoja de papel, convirtiéndose en aliada de los asuntos del ayer. Ligerita quiero ser, ligerita quiero ser, así de blanca así de blanca como una hoja de papel, y que escribe sobre mí la vida, que mi cuerpo marque su alegría, su placer, blanca de ser, para que escriba en mí la vida, para que escriba en mí la vida, para que escriba en mí la vida. Una hoja en blanco es lo que necesito, donde la ansiedad y la apatía. Una hoja en blanco es lo que necesito, donde la ansiedad y la apatía se ocultan, donde la ansiedad y la impaciencia se refugien, donde la ansiedad y la impaciencia se refugien. Aliviando mis pesares va la hoja de papel, convirtiéndose en aliada de los asuntos del ayer. Ligerita quiero ser, ligerita quiero ser, así de blanca como una hoja de papel, así de blanca como una hoja de papel. Oh, 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 una hoja en blanco es lo que yo te pido, donde la soledad y el corazón se juntan, donde la soledad y la conciencia se dibuje, donde la soledad y la conciencia se dibujen. Aliviando mis pesares va la hoja de papel, convirtiéndose.
Hola a todos, bienvenidos hoy a esta nueva conferencia plenaria. Me llamo Andrea, soy intérprete y estoy aquí con mi cointérprete Sandra.
Hello, my name is Andrea. I am an interpreter and welcome to this plenary session. I'm here with my co-interpreter Sandra.
La justicia lingüística incluye el compromiso de asegurarnos de que se puedan escuchar todas las voces. Quiero comenzar reconociendo todos los idiomas presentes hoy aquí, entre estos el lenguaje de señas estadounidenses y también que además habrá subtítulos en inglés.
Language justice includes a commitment to making sure all voices can be heard. I want to begin by acknowledging all the languages represented here today, including American Sign Language, and also we will have closed captioning in English available.
Hoy este evento se llevará a cabo en español y en inglés. Le explicaré cómo puede elegir un canal para participar en su idioma preferido.
Today, this event will be held in Spanish and English, and I will explain how you can choose a channel to participate in your preferred language.
Estaremos usando la función de interpretación de Zoom. Si está en su computadora, verá un icono terráqueo en la parte inferior de la pantalla. Le avisaré en unos momentos cuando activemos la función y podrá ver el icono. Si está en su tableta o teléfono, pulse en más o more y verá 3 puntitos para poder acceder a la opción de interpretación de idiomas. Para escuchar la interpretación, pulse el icono terráqueo y después elija su canal de idioma. Si está en su teléfono o tableta, simplemente haga clic o toque en listo, done.
We'll be using the Zoom interpreting function. If you're using a computer, you will see a globe icon at the bottom of your screen. We have not activated interpretation yet, so I will let you know when to look for the icon. If you are on a tablet or phone, click on More or the 3 little dots, and you will see a menu that includes an option called Language Interpretation. To listen to the interpreting, click the globe icon or language interpretation. Then choose your language channel, and if you're using a phone or tablet, click Done.
Okay, so host, please activate Sandra as an interpreter. Por favor, activemos a Sandra como intérprete. Ok, ahora podrá ver este globo terráqueo en su pantalla. Now you will be able to see the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. Please go ahead and choose your language. Por favor, ahora elija su idioma. Hagamos una pequeña prueba para ver que todo esté bien. Sandra, por favor, puedes comenzar a interpretar en español, en inglés, porque estoy hablando en español. La gente que nos esté escuchando en inglés, por favor, denos un pulgar arriba, ya sea en el chat, o pueden decirnos, estamos escuchando. Ahora cambiemos al... Now let's change to the other direction. So Sandra, can you let me know if you're interpreting into Spanish right now. So everyone, please, if you've selected your language as Spanish, you should be able to listen to the interpreter. Can you please say in the chat, I can listen, puedo escuchar? Okay, perfect, we're set. If for some reason this doesn't work for you, please drop a line in the chat and we'll assist you further. Thank you so much, and we'll begin with the plenary. Okay.
Indeed. Let us be loving. Welcome back to day 3 of the National Conference on Health and Domestic Violence. My name is Virginia Duplessis, and I'm your MC. Woo! What an amazing event we've had so far. I have learned so much, and I'm looking forward to our amazing plenary this morning and the sessions the rest of the day. I'll definitely be ready for our restorative yoga this afternoon. And I know it's not the same as all of us being together in one place, but I hope that you're able to connect with other participants and presenters through our networking corner and our virtual poster viewing gallery. I want to go ahead and kick off this morning's plenary session. As I'm sure many of you know, April is Sexual Assault Awareness and Action Month, as well as Child Abuse Prevention Month. And our speakers are going to speak directly to these issues. It's a panel entitled Preventing and Healing Childhood Sexual Violence, Mind, Body, and Soul. All of our speakers are really going to be exploring a public health approach to preventing and responding to child sexual abuse through healing, activism, and talking a little bit about what the healthcare system can do. Today's panel is moderated by Tashmica, Torok, who will be facilitating a conversation between Amita, Swadhin, Angela Diaz, and Keith Mascoll. So a little bit about our presenters today. Tashmica is a nationally recognized survivor activist working to end child sexual abuse. She is a powerhouse fundraiser and movement maker. As the executive director of the Firecracker Foundation, she is spearheading trauma-sensitive youth yoga in Lansing, Michigan. Tashmica also serves as a member of the Reliance Policy Committee, the visioning group of the Michigan Domestic and Sexual Violence Prevention and Treatment Board, and she is the co-chair of the Capital Area Sexual Assault Response Team. She's also a member of the Just Beginnings Collaborative. For our panel, we are joined by Amita Swadhin, who is an educator, storyteller, healer, writer, and strategist dedicated to fighting interpersonal and institutional violence against young people. They are the creator of Memoirs, which is a national storytelling and organizing nonprofit intervening in rape culture by uplifting the narratives, healing, and leadership of LGBTQI people of color who survive sexual abuse. They've also served as the Los Angeles Executive Director of the Peer Health Exchange. They were a coordinator and cast member of Secret Survivors, which is a theater project featuring child sexual abuse survivors telling their stories. And they've been a youth organizer and anti-violence advocate in New York City. Amita is joined by Dr. Angela Diaz, who is the Jean C. and James W. Crystal Professor in Adolescent Health at the Icahn School of Medicine. She is also the director of the Mount Sinai Adolescent Health Center, which is a program that provides care to teens regardless of their insurance status. Under her leadership, the center has actually become the largest adolescent health center in the United States, and it serves more than 12,000 young people a year. Dr. Diaz is a member of the National Academy of Medicine and has been a White House Fellow as well. Last but certainly not least, we are joined by Keith Mascoll. He may look familiar from if you attended last night's amazing performance of The Triggered Life. He is the founding creator of Triggered Life, which utilizes art as a method to express and liberate the trauma stories of many men whose stories have not been told and deserve to be discovered and appreciated. As a founding staff member of Citizen Schools, he played a significant role in improving the educational trajectories of young people across the country. He is also a co-founder of a Boston-based professional Black theater company. With that, I'm going to hand the mic over to Tashmica. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that warm reading of everybody's introductions. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for, number one, allowing me to hop into this panelist position, moderator position. I have a deep respect for all of the people who are on this panel and all of the people organizing this conference. So thank you so much. And I just want to take a moment and say thank you all for your work. I know that the time that we are existing in is painful. And I personally am very tired and feeling a little heavy. So I just want to extend my gratitude that you all are still here and still doing this work and waking up every day to really challenge these systems. So before we get into the conversation, I'm just going to give a little bit of framing. We know that child sexual abuse is very prevalent, and the national statistic that there are 42 million survivors is really rooted in what has been reported. And so we also know that the prevalence is much higher, and I think you're going to hear that from some of our panelists this morning. We also know that the prevalence is impacting historically marginalized communities more than their counterparts. We know that children who are LGBTQIA, children who are Black, Indigenous children, and then of course our children with disabilities are experiencing sexual violence at much higher rates than their white passing counterparts. And so when we're talking about child sexual abuse and we're highlighting these children, we really need to be thinking about who it is we're really centering as we do this work. And I just want to also lift up that we carry our own intergenerational trauma of sexual violence that has been perpetrated against us as a tactic of white supremacy, in addition to all of the things that are happening in the contemporary time. So given that framework, and as we're thinking about this as a matter of not just urgency, but also a matter of public health, I'd like to start off the conversation with Keith and just ask about why there is a lack of focus, particularly around Black male identifying boys when we're trying to respond to child sexual abuse.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for really setting the stage for this conversation and acknowledging the heaviness that we all feel during this time. So thank you so much for that. You know, I think that one thing is, which is a little bit sad, but it's something that in the work that I've been doing with the Triggered Project, is that, you know, systems of care are not made for and not welcoming to Black and brown boys and Black and brown men historically. And so that's a really big problem. Really thankful that we have Dr. Diaz, because she's an exception to the rule, because she will ask the questions. She cares about everyone and everybody's well-being, and definitely when it comes to youth. So we need more folks like her doing the work, to be perfectly honest with you, because that care is what changes people's perception. That care makes folks comfortable to be able to share what needs to be told. And then they also know that they're going to get the support. So there's no belief in the support system. And that's one of the main reasons. But also, you know, we also think that boys should just be able to handle a situation like that as well. And we should be protecting our girls and folks that identify in that way, most definitely. But it's just not a thought in a lot of ways. And I think it's also not a thought because it's not something that we feel comfortable in our mind thinking about. It's never comfortable to think about any type of sexual abuse, but we're also not sure how to deal with it. With the work that the Triggered Project has done, we did something with the National Association of Black Social Workers, and we had over 150 the best and brightest in the room, and they were dumbfounded on what to do with this issue, how to have the conversation, how to ask, you know, the trauma-informed question of what happened to you, but not only ask the question, but what are the next steps in terms of support? And I really think that it takes all of us to really start having that conversation amongst ourselves, but it also comes down to the roles that we feel that we're putting young people in, and putting young boys in. There's a lot of discussion now about gender and things like that. And I think that's really important because we have to redefine what that means. Myself as a survivor, I had to redefine what manhood means and what it meant to me. And all the things that I was taught about being a man were all the same things that are in the way of my healing. And so that was a difficult journey to try to really break that down for myself. And it wasn't until I was more of a young man and growing into a man that I started to deal with that. But where was I going to go for support with that? I couldn't go to the other men in my family to have that conversation. Who outside my home could I talk to? Who in the medical field could I talk to and feel comfortable enough and not feel shame? And so that's the difficulty. That's the difficulty in this and in that question. But just not made. Just system cares are just not made for us. And we need to protect all our children. We protect all of our children equally.
Keith, what you're saying really resonates with me this week as a mother of two Black boys and one Black trans daughter, and having to navigate healthcare systems and experiencing racist violence and intimidation just in trying to access care. And so I feel that, and I want to ask Angela, as someone who is doing this work, how can we improve systems of care so our people feel safe enough to use them? Where are the lessons and opportunities that we can share with other providers? Because we know, if we are able to transition and transform healthcare systems, these lessons are applicable to educational systems. It's applicable to all of these spaces where we are feeling the push out, right? That Black girls and Black boys are being pushed out. So can you speak a little bit to how we can improve those systems of care?
Thank you, Tashmica. I also want to recognize the uniqueness of the time and also the amazing impact that the pandemics, both COVID-19, the financial crisis, and the racial injustice is having in young people. The program that I run is called the Mount Sinai Adolescent Health Center, and 94% of the youth that we work with are youth of color. But I want to start by recognizing that large systems, such as hospitals, tend to be very impersonal, and often because of those centuries of structural, systemic, organizational, and interpersonal racism and the culture this creates, people of color do not feel accepted, understood, or taken care of, and do not trust these systems. Communities of color have been dealing with wrongful, harmful experiences by big systems, including hospitals. Because of racism and the intersectionality of race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status, Black and Brown people are more likely to interface with large public systems and much more likely, for example, to be reported to child abuse and neglect, leading to the disproportionality of people of color in the child welfare system. Therefore, it is important to create a trusted, supportive, and safe environment for young people, especially young people of color. Young people want to feel welcome, respected, connected, safe, not judged, and definitely not discriminated against. They want to be treated as young people, not necessarily as patients, clients, or victims. The physical space needs to be youth-friendly, colorful, warm, designed with the art that young people can relate to, and with messages that are inclusive for all young people, and messages that are meaningful to them. The staff, people usually either love teenagers or stay away from them, But if you're going to be working with young people, you need to love them. You need to understand them. You need to have the skill set to be able to work with them and be nurturing and empathic. At the Mount Sinai Adolescent Health Center, we serve young people ages 10 to 26. And as I said, 94 youth of color, mostly Black and brown. And we also have all type of gender. We have helped transition more than 600 youth. So we, the full range of young people feel comfortable coming here. When you work with such a broad age, you need to really provide those services in a way that is developmental. So the way that I talk to a kid who's 10, 11, or 12 need to be simple language that is descriptive, sometimes with visual. And as they get older, you can become more abstract and really discuss more complex issues. What I learned working in the field for many decades is that it is very important to ask direct questions, because young people do not come saying, my father has sex with me or my aunt has sex with me. And they really do not mention this type of things about anyone that is doing sexual things to them. And in general, even when you take a very extensive history, they do not volunteer, they don't volunteer a history of sexual abuse. Therefore, what I learned, and I learned this accidentally, because I was training here in adolescent medicine and I was doing my thing, and we think we do great health care. But one day some medical students came to do a research project, and they found out that 58% of the young women that were there that day for routine health care had a history of sexual trauma. And even though I was a trainee, I said to the director, there's something wrong. We spend all this time doing physical and checking ears. I mean, if a teenager has an ear infection, they will have pain. They will be able to tell you that. But yet we do not uncover. We are not aware of this history of sexual abuse, and those kids get back home, or either to continue to be abused or to deal with the impact of the abuse. So since then, this is way back in the early 80s, I began asking every single person that I see about a history. And what I learned was that if you ask them in a language that is simple, that they understand in an empathic way, they share the history with you. The way that we work is that we really want to have a conversation with young people, asking them about themselves, their family, friends, school, and so on. I want to know their strengths, their hopes and aspirations. I want to know what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they are doing. But also I want to know if anything happened to them. So the way that I take the history is, I ask them, has anyone ever touched you in a way that you didn't want to be touched? Was that your father, your mother, your grandparent, your cousins? Was that your breast, your vagina, your penis, your buttocks? And I do this so that they know that I know these things happen. And if they disclose that to me, I will be able to handle. And then based on what they share with us, we just create an individualized intervention plan, including the more traditional trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, but also mind-body work like yoga. We also use a lot of art like dance and photograph. We want the young people to heal in their totality. So that's how we work. And there's much more I can say, but I know we have to move on.
No, that's beautiful. And actually, I just want to go back to Keith, because, I loved how you framed that it's not just the questions you ask, it's also about the physical space. It's also about the capacity of the people providing care, that they actually have a deep love beyond medical skill, but they love you and that they want to be with them, because I think that's something that people forget.
Yeah.
Kids ain't for everybody, y'all. Even my kids don't want kids, and they'll tell you that my youngest one is 12, and he's like, "Mom, I ain't messing with them kids." And I'm like, "You talk like a very jaded 50-year-old man, And but people need to love kids to work with them. So Keith, when you hear that, does that resonate when you think about the spaces that perhaps you would have wanted to encounter, or the spaces you want to create for other youth?
Yeah, I think that makes a big difference. I mean, I wish I had Dr. Diaz as my doctor when I was younger, but that's just not
Yeah.
I never felt comfortable.
Yeah.
I never felt comfortable going to the doctor and having discussions, having an examination or anything else. Was always very sterile.
Yeah.
You know, but creating that environment, and Roxanne says it was my partner who's a social worker, is about, you know, Black and brown folks are about relationships, right? We're all about relationships. And so being able to create that environment that there is a relationship creates trust. And that's always the first step. And that's what we heard from Dr. Diaz, and with, you know, the work that we're doing with the Triggered Project and stuff. And that is first and foremost. Trying to be authentic as possible is also important. You know, what you say and how you act needs to add up, but creating the space for those voices to be heard is huge. And we need more of that. We need more spaces in general for all voices that have not been heard and get pushed down to be heard. And using art is a great way to do that. And that's why the Triggered Project is using film, is using stage, is using a podcast, is using sneaker culture to talk about mental health, but also to get to these deep-rooted issues and encourage self-love.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. Yeah, and I think that this goes full circle into the next question, or kind of leads me to bring Amita into the conversation, so we can talk about sort of the impact that we see on intimate relationships when people are survivors of child sexual abuse. So Amita, would you share a little bit about what those impacts are, how they show up for survivors in their lives, in your experience and your work?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, sure. Thanks for that question, Tashmica. My brain is also just buzzing with all of the great input from you and Angela and Keith.
And feel free, like, if you want to respond to something, I am not the boss of you.
I mean, I know this.
You can
We're
respond
friends. For
to
folks who
something
don't
else
know,
too.
that Tashmica and I were in the Just Beginnings Collaborative Fellowship together and have known each other for 5 years now. So trust that I will. You know, it's hard to stay focused just on how child sexual abuse affects relationships when you talk about the people we're working with in Mirror Memoirs. And I am of the same community that I'm an organizer in, right? As a queer non-binary person who was raped throughout my childhood, who's a brown-skinned child of immigrants, who had mandated intervention by the state in my life in 9th grade in a very violent white supremacist way. So I think when we talk about queer and trans and intersex and non-binary Black and Indigenous and of color children who are raped or sexually assaulted by somebody, and often more than one somebodies, before the age of 18, and then they grow up into these United States, we have to start bringing the entire puzzle together to see the big picture. Because of course, our relationships as human beings are affected by the individualized acts of trauma and violence that we endured as children, but we are also not white people, often not cisgender people, often not wealthy people, you know, often not straight heterosexual people. So the state is also inflicting violence upon us from the moment that we're born until the moment that we die. And not just us, but also our relatives, our neighbors, our friends. We are living in a time where more people of privilege who don't have that experience of violence and being attacked by the state are starting to understand that we have multiple realities in these United States, right? The reality of Black people is different than the reality of Indigenous people, and Black and Indigenous people face the highest forms of state violence in the country. And that's because of the history of the way this thing we called the nation was founded. And then those of us, you know, myself as a child of immigrants who are non-white people, that's a different kind of a learning curve. And then within immigrant populations, there's the question of, did you come here with documentation or are you undocumented? There's the question of, were you fleeing war? Are you a refugee from state violence somewhere else? You know, many experiences of refugees are also connected to the American empire, because are you fleeing a place where the American military is in an active occupation and imperialism? And trust that sexual violence and rape culture is part of that entire infrastructure. And it's incredibly well documented. We know there's New York Times stories that children are being raped in American immigrant detention center camps. There's New York Times stories and other publications. I'm a New Yorker, so, you know, I'm going to lift that one up. But, you know, there's stories in the paper about what are called so-called juvenile detention centers, right? Which is jails for kids. We live in a country where we put kids in jails and then they get raped by the prison guards. We live in a country in which children are considered property legally of their parents. That's why we have this thing called legal emancipation for young people who are being hurt and traumatized by their parents, and then they have to fight to get away from them. Often, for children who are gender nonconforming or transgender, if they are unfortunate enough to not have a loving mother like you, when they come out as transgender or they're outed as transgender, often those children are pathologized within their families. Many of the members in Memoirs who are transgender people of color were put into state-run psychiatric institutions as children by their own families, when their families learned that they were not cisgender, and then they were raped or sexually assaulted in those state-run psychiatric institutions by the staff members there. And the thing is, this arc of violence from state-supported institutions and from the state itself does not end for people of color, particularly people of color who are queer and trans, when we turn 18. Oftentimes it gets worse, right? And so your question is hard for me to answer in a vacuum around how does the experience of being a child sexual abuse survivor affect our relationships? Because I think that the answer has to be, well, living in an environment of ongoing state violence and white supremacist hate civilian violence, where I constantly have to worry about whether my partner, who happens to be a Black transgender man, if today is going to be the day that when he gets pulled over by the cops and gets a gun pulled on him while he's driving is the day that that trigger gets pulled. I also have to think about, you know, there was a Memoirs member, one of our core members, who was attacked by a mob at the end of the year in West Hollywood in Los Angeles, where I live. And she was lucky enough to be attacked near a hospital. And when she went to, she's a Afro-Latinx, intersex, trans feminine person. When she fled, ran away from her attackers, and was able to stumble across a hospital and approached the emergency medicine department for care, they looked at her. She had been drugged during the attack. They looked at her without doing any kind of formal intake and literally wrote on the intake form, drunk and homeless, which she was neither of those things. She is employed full-time at a leading service provider organization serving the trans community here in Los Angeles, and had been raped, beaten, and drugged. And they dismissed her. They did not care for her. She had to stumble to another hospital to find the care that she needed and deserved. Right. And so,
you know, Amita, I just want to there's this thing that we talk about at the Firecracker Foundation. We talk about belonging a lot, how to create belonging. And one of the things that rose up in our conversations together after the verdict came down for Derek Chauvin in the murder of George Floyd was that our children are not allowed to develop systems of belonging and connections because their elders are being stolen from them. Their elders are, if they're not being imprisoned, they're being put at risk by COVID-19 because our elders are dying. Our children are in public schools where if they get into a fight, they can catch an adult charge. And like you said, be put into a jail for children. they're just not allowed these sort of safe networks of care. Their families are consistently being pulled apart. And so when we look at things like adverse childhood experiences and how that how that continues to just tear away at a child's sense of belonging and a connection to elders who can provide the guidance. You know, when I think about, Angela, what you're talking about, you are put in that position of being an elder, right? In a position of power, in possession of care that people need. And when people who are in those roles don't understand the complexities that Amita is lifting up, they can do more harm. And so I have to say, first of all, I love how Amita shared that story, but shared that answer that is more complex, right? Because I think people fail to see how those connections are, what those webs are that get pulled, right? So like a question that came up in the comments is, how do you manage reporting to Child Protective Services and how that happens? Because we also know that those mandated reports can be another trigger point for harm, like what Amita is naming, right? When children are pulled from their homes, and we know that that is largely happening to Black and Brown families. How are you able to manage those complexities?
Sorry, is that an open question?
Oh, that was a question to Angela in healthcare, but I mean, it can definitely be an open question. Angela, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, what I will say is that the way that we work with the youth, we work with them confidentially, and because we want them to come and ask for help. And we love parents. We know that parents are extremely important in the life of their youth, but we want the young people to walk in and ask for help, and then get into this conversation. How do they get along with their parents? Do they talk with their parents about what and all that? And we say that everything is confidential, except if their life is in danger, somebody else's life is in danger, or if they are being abused and you know, they feel threatened. So we sort of say that to make sure the young person understand that before they share anything with us, and that they don't feel betrayed if we say things are confidential. Then we run to do a report. But what we want young people to do is really to come here to heal, to get the help. You know, you know, I'm a medical trained person, and we have a whole bunch of mental health people and social workers in the program. And then we really then backwards to work with our youth and their families. You know, sometimes they need to be reported, and the social worker will do that. But that's not what I intend. We want young people to do well, to heal, to really have the opportunity to connect with us. Sometimes we almost feel like if we are co-parenting with our youth, you know, they come here to show us our report card. They invite us to their, you know, events. Sometimes we have to go to their funeral because we have sometimes many, you know, some kids who die. So we are just part of their family. So that's how we sort of do things. And this is about the youth, their families, our communities, with the understanding that the larger system, having those kids removed from their home, may not be in the best interest because of what Amita said. That happens sometimes when you are in the different systems. So we really try to work with the youth and their families in the best possible outcome for them, understanding that we are mandated reporters and we need to do those type of assessment, and at times they need to be reported.
Yeah, I'm gonna shift focus. We've been talking a lot about the violence and the harms, and I want to start talking a little bit more towards the healing part of this work that you all are doing. But before I do that, I just want to lift up and underscore that the recognition that our work is often, when a report of child sexual abuse is being made, to actually find creative solutions that involve community and protecting kids from the state. And what I'm hearing you say is that there's confidentiality, there's community belonging, and making sure that they feel safe enough to tell you, and then determining whether safety is at such a risk that you have to involve the state, but it is only because that might be our only option. And I have to say that because the labor that people who are in this work do in order to protect children from the state when the state is, you know, supposed to be helping is immense. And so I just have to lift that up so that we can all just hear that clearly.
Right. May I jump in really quickly?
Yes,
Just because I just wanted to just respond to the last question. And I think, Amita brought up, great points about the system, right? But within that system, also there's an invisibility of Black men completely. And I think that is, the question is, and I'm glad that they brought up all the systems, but what we don't talk about is how it affects personal relationships, right? And I think that's something that's incredibly important, because there's a lot of folks who are going through the same type of thing of, how do you deal with a partner? How does it play out that way? And how do you deal with sex? How do you deal with when you're triggered, right? Mm-hmm. And that those conversations are one that we just do not have. And it's something that's affecting people every single day. And it's incredibly important. And it is difficult to be present with a partner, knowing all the stuff about the systems and everything else. I can walk out my door and it's possible that I can be shot in the next 4 or 5 seconds that I walk out of my door. However, for me to be in union with whoever I choose to be in union, I have to be present to be able to figure out how I'm going to be in a relationship and be vulnerable and be truthful, and to learn what my partner's triggers are, and try to figure out what my triggers are as I'm trying to deal with my trauma of sexual abuse. Mm-hmm. And try to come to a medium, right? How do you have that conversation? And that's one thing that, with the trigger part we talk about on the podcast, because it's something that people have always asked about. Mm-hmm. And so how do we do it? Right? How does that, and even say for you and things like that is being able to examine that and give tools or possible ways that people deal with it is incredibly important to say.
Yeah, Keith, and actually, thank you for responding to that, because someone was asking me, a community organization was asking me about what systems of support are missing, and what are some things that we've been asked for repeatedly that no one has created. And one of my responses was that there are a couple times a year, a partner will call, someone's partner, husband, spouse, will call and say, I just found out my partner is a survivor and I don't know how to support them. And I really need help, like figuring out what my role is as their care partner. And I'm always at a loss, not at a loss. Like, of course I have, as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse and incest myself, I have tips that I can give from my personal relationships, but there is no sort of support group in my area. I'm sure that there may be some other places, but this is a consistent need that definitely gets lifted up. And it is, I went into therapy when I was 30, and, my husband has his own stuff that he needs to work out, not currently and in the past. I'm perfect, just so you know. I went to therapy.
Of course. I knew that by your hair. I knew that. I knew that by the flower behind you. I knew.
Yeah. I'm perfect, but I had to drag him in, and it was hard, it's a hard thing to heal yourself and also be connected to other people. And then you add children and how triggering having children can be, that we don't talk about that a lot either. And having children that just touch your body all the time and learn how to cope in a way that doesn't build disconnection, and allows for attachment. And so thank you so much for bringing that back into because this is also about healing. So when we're talking about those things, then what are some of the things that we can lift up that you have heard from survivors, and this is open to all of you, that they're asking for, that they need in order to access the healing that they want to see in their lives?
Yeah, I know Amita had their hand up. Sorry, excuse me.
Thanks, Keith. yeah, we ask in Mirror Memoir. So some folks who have been following the project for a while, we started as an audio archive. It's the basis for our membership-based building with one-on-one storytelling. I interviewed 60 survivors who are queer and trans and intersex folks of color across 15 different states. And one of the interview questions was, if you step through a portal into a dimension in which capitalism doesn't exist, and your only responsibility for the entire time you're in that dimension is to heal yourself, and you have a bottomless toolbox with every spiritual and material resource you need to support your healing endeavor, what's in the box? And
first of all, if you can you find that portal, please? I would I would love it. Where is the portal? Where is
I look
it?
for it every day, trust me. The closest I've gotten is going into meditation or maybe doing some plant medicine. Psilocybin is my friend. And like, you know, I live in California. So like stare at the sky, look at the stars, like remember the plants. And I only mean that, you know, sincerely. I think a lot about what people's answers were in the archive. I just want to say that 0 people said doctors and police and prosecutors and prisons. And I was astounded by that. I happen to be an abolitionist, but that's not a requirement for being in Mirror Memoirs, right? Anyone could come forward and tell their story. And I guess when you think about how much state violence and white supremacist civilian violence is aimed at our communities all the time, it's also not surprising that people would look beyond those systems, right? People said, I want secure housing. I want a lot of people said food. I want to cook for the people I love. I want to eat with the people I love. I want art supplies. I want music. I want to garden. I want to grow my own food. I want to have animals that I'm in a good relationship with. And then, you know, now we have coming out of or in correlation with the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, people in the public health and anti-violence fields are starting to talk about PACEs, protective and compensatory experiences. And I think that that's wonderful language. It's important language. And I just want to offer that for people who come from generational trauma, right? We don't necessarily need the studies to know that our ancestors, as much as they endured trauma, they also survived. That's why we're here. We have intergenerational resilience. We have ancestral resilience. And so a lot of the answers in Mirror Memoirs are about how to rebuild what you were talking about, Tashmica, how to rebuild your practices of belonging, your practices of intimacy, your practices of connection and interdependence. Mutual aid that is being talked about through this pandemic is like a survival tactic that any oppressed people have been doing for thousands of years, right? We know how to build communities. And so I think in this time period of abolition finally being talked about more, when we talk about redirecting resources away from systems of punishment, I think we don't talk enough about what we're directing them to, right? What would it mean to invest in land projects that are land trusts, that are places where a survivor who's having a breakdown psychically, somatically, in terms of mental health, can go and live for free, be fed, be attended to, be in relationship with healing plants that Indigenous people have known about, you know, plants like ayahuasca, plants like psilocybin, plants like cannabis, that now there's all these studies about, wow, this works. It's like, yeah, no kidding. It's a 5,000-year-old recipe stewarded by Indigenous people. Like, as it turns out, the planet wants us to heal. And what would it mean to build places of healing with the literal billions of dollars that we have been forced to invest in systems of punishment, and create systems of healing that are actually designed by people who have been oppressed and attacked by this nation state since this country was founded. And we can do it. And it's a conversation I just want to keep having. I just want to be in that conversation all day long. What is the world that we're building so that we can be joyful and together and interdependent and connected and healing together?
Yes, absolutely.
And I would like to share some of the few things that I have learned. When I am doing my history and I learned that the young people have a history of sexual abuse, I spend them separate from that, a lot of time with them, just talking, just understanding, even them, listening to them, understanding their experience and what is it that they need or want. And one of the major things that I learned from them is that one of the very important things is that they want to protect their siblings from also being abused. sometimes when the abuse is going on, the abuser may say to the person that I'm seeing, you know, this is fine, and if we continue doing this or whatever, I will not touch your sibling or whatever. And then one of the major reasons that they disclose is when they find that their sibling may be at risk, or they find out that they are actually being abused. So that seems to be very important to them, protecting their siblings. The other things is that often when they disclose, people do not believe them. And they want to be believed, because not only did this experience happen to them, and I find that the impact of people not believing them or denying their experience sometimes is as hurtful. That's what they articulate as the abuse itself. They also do not want to be removed from home, because that disrupts their life, their friends, their school, their families. They feel that the abuser needs to be removed, not them. And sometimes the system doesn't work in that way, thinking about being very youth-centered or what a young person need. And they also want to avoid the same thing to happen to children they may have, their own children, the teenager or the young person children, or that they are thinking of having. So they often ask, how do I make sure this doesn't happen to my children? You know, and we do support groups. In addition, like once I find out that they were sexually abused, I connect them for the more traditional individual psychotherapy. We also do family therapy to try to help the family heal and understand and support and love. But we also do groups, support groups with young people who are all have a history of sexual abuse, so that they get the support that they need, so that they, when they say themselves, you know, it was my fault, either because the abuser say it was their fault or whatever, they hear another member say, but you were 5 or you were 7 or whatever. So they're able to also then reflect that, oh, no, this was not my fault. You know, and we say as facilitator, that adult, that person was not supposed to do that to you. There was nothing that you did that merit that person really sexually abusing you. And the other thing is that they learn to work out their feelings. They usually have a lot of feelings, including anger, you know, if the non-abusing person didn't believe them, and they're able to work, develop trust in the group and learn to build that. You know, we work with the anger, all the emotion that the young people have to help them heal, because it's all about healing, and they are so resilient. I cannot imagine how these youth, with the experiences that they have had, are still going to school. They still love their family. They still help others. I mean, it's incredible, the resilient that young people have, and we have to nurture that and really support them in every way we can.
And respect them. You know, I just think about the way that people talk about children beyond how they treat them. And, you know, given this year, like what our children have been through, on top of all of the systems challenges that we've been talking about, people need to respect children, because yes, kids are doing like the most and the best with a lot of shit that they shouldn't have to deal with. And so I see, you know, when we talk about people needing to also love to work with kids, but also like respect that they're so resilient and that they have the answers, and that they're creative and resourceful, and they resource one another. Like, I'm always amazed when my kids are telling me about how they had to, you know, that they know how to put money on someone's card in jail, that they know how to get access to Plan B. Like, how do these kids know how to navigate the system? They are smart, and they deserve our respect and honoring what it is that they want because of that.
Yes.
So there's a little moderator speech. Keith, what were you saying?
No. I was going to say, with the inner monologue work that we're doing, one of the first questions is asked is the high school students that we're dealing with is what is it like to live that Zoom life? And they're so surprised because nobody cares. Nobody's asking, right? And I try to explain to them too that, like what you're writing right now is documenting history, right? And either you can control your own narrative or someone else is going to write your narrative for you, right? And I think that we do have to give young people a lot more credit for this time and everything that they've dealt with, because socially everything has been taken away from them. And they're living on Zoom, and it's, you know, there's no rhyme or reason to it. And of course, no one knew how to handle this, so it was a mess. And then they're going to be thrown back in to what's supposed to be normal, and they're just supposed to deal and adjust. We have to find ways to ask them those questions and give them, and that's what we're using art to be able to have them get that out. You know, having discussions really, and giving them the space to talk about everything that's going on with them is incredibly important. So I wanted to lift that up, because I think that goes along with what Dr. Diaz was saying, creating space for conversation and acknowledging their resiliency and encouraging them, and also really getting them to acknowledge that as well. And that's something that we don't always do well enough, is to acknowledge the work of young people and the greatness of young people, to build that confidence so they can continue to be resilient and deal with all the systems that they have to deal with, never mind what they deal with at home.
Yeah. So I just want to ask our final question. I know there are a lot of questions in the comments, but y'all, these people are so smart and so brilliant and so innovative, and I could spend all day talking to them, and I wish I could get to every single question, because there are some really good questions. But I just want to leave on this sort of hopeful, visionary note. We're doing a conference called Futures Without Violence. So let's just take a moment to vision and share what we think a world without child sexual abuse looks like. So let's just do a round of talking about that and dreaming about this portal that we can jump through into a world where CSA doesn't exist. What does our world look like?
I guess I can start us off, and I want to hear everyone's answer, but we talk about this in Mirror Memoirs all the time. You know, I think there's a bigger conversation to be had here. And Keith, you started to touch upon this around respecting children. Like, what would it look like to live in a world in which children have full autonomy because they're human beings, right? And how do we provide the most space possible for every human being to be their full selves from the moment they arrive in this physical form on this plane? So to me, that means we stop the practice of assigning sex and gender in utero or at birth. You actually don't know someone's sex or gender just by looking at them, unless you're checking someone's chromosomes and unless that newborn infant can magically speak to you. Ask Tashmica. She thought she had 3 boys. Turns out she has 2 boys and a girl, right? I mean, this is real stuff, and it impacts people's lives to be misgendered throughout their entire life. It makes them targets of violence. It's like one of the big factors that attracts sexual violence to gender nonconforming children. So we can stop that practice. That's actually like a socially constructed practice. We can say right now we live in a cultural and political climate, and you may know this, everyone, but this is about child sexual abuse too. 28 different states right now are debating bills about whether trans kids should be able to get gender affirming care. 4 of those states are saying that parents and doctors, people like Angela and Tashmica, who support a trans kid to get gender affirming care, can be prosecuted as being guilty of child abuse, right? So I think that there's the big vision question, Tashmica, and then there's the harm reduction steps that we take right now to shield people from the ongoing violence. And in a harm reduction way, I just want to close my part by saying, in Mirror Memoirs, my co-executive director, Jaden Fields, is a California Women's Foundation Policy Institute, and he was trying to find political support to mandate all K through 12 educators to teach children what mandated reporting is, and to give all young people free hotline information so that if they don't want to trigger state intervention, but they still want to talk to someone and get care, that they were able to do that, and couldn't find an elected official to support the bill, right? So we just all need to get more creative about, if this is a 2008 International Journal of Child Abuse and Neglect statistic, 80% of kids who are child sexual abuse survivors who ever tell somebody only disclose to an age peer and then never talk about it again. So what would it mean to create a K through 12 curriculum that actually meets children in that reality? They're already talking to each other about child sexual abuse. They're already talking to each other about all kinds of violence. Give them the tools so that if someone discloses to them, they know what to do. They know what the hotlines are. They know what resilience factors are. They know what the brain does during trauma. They know what the limbic system is. They know all the resilience and protective factors, and they can support their friends in that way. And I know that we can live in that world. So we should all be fighting for those political changes.
Thank you, Amita.
You know, and I think that children need to be loved. They need to be loved, by everyone, and have consistency. And also, we need to see children having rights and not being property. And that we all together, that it takes a village, but it's a village of positive, loving people to raise the kids, whether it's at home, love, consistency, investment in that young person, in our community, in school, not being punitive. Really, if a kid is acting up, not just expelling them or removing them from class, they just get behind and then they drop out. No, let's talk. What is going on that you're acting this way? How can I help you? Can I connect you to services? All those things I think are very, very important. And understanding that if we raise really happy, healthy, well-educated children with hopes and opportunity, they will do better. And then those same children become teenagers and they become adults and they become the next generation. So we create really systems of love and resilience and just amazing, a wonderful society to live in is what I have to say. Because if we don't protect our children and our youth, what in heaven are we doing?
Right. First of all, I just have to say the weather would be like San Diego. I think that's just important. Number one, because you always have to have a good environment, and sun is incredible and warm. And looking at the sun more than snow makes a big difference in terms of how much you smile. It's something that I've been working on. And, coming back from being in Portland for a while and people telling me it was really rainy and stuff, but I could still see a hint of the sun. I was like, this isn't rainy, the sun's out. This is great. So I think that's really important as we try to imagine things. But what I think about is, so does that mean that the power dynamic of the world goes away as well? Because there's a lot of things that have to happen before we can really talk about just a world without sexual abuse, right? And Amita brought up all those things. So my thing, I can't help but think about all those other things that have to go away to make that happen. You know what I'm saying? And so, of course, I would love to see that. And I think love is what it's all about. And Dr. Diaz touched on it in a great way. I can't say it any better than that. But a world of love, a world of respect, a world of discovery, of self-discovery, and allowing that process. I think that's what Amita was talking about, allowing that process to happen, and for us to be more accepting of allowing people to define themselves. Is what it looks like. That's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, and I'll just say to wrap us up, first of all, thank you all so much. As I said, I could sit here all day, but they won't let me. There's rules. That's a rule we have to follow. And I will say, when I think about that question, I think about how parents and adults, how child sexual abuse is actually not a problem of children. It's a problem of adults. It's a problem of power. It's a problem of violence that is passed on. And I think about all of the adults who need to do a lot of work liberating themselves so that they can make space for liberated children. So thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to moderate. And with that, I'll let Virginia take us out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of our speakers. And we've really come full circle, right? We started this morning with the song Let Us Be Loving by Vocal Rush. And I think if we can be loving to ourselves, to everyone in our families and our communities, we can go so far towards preventing child sexual abuse and certainly being empathetic and helping folks who've had that experience to heal as well. So with that, I'm going to transition us into our next sessions. We have 3 more blocks of concurrent sessions today, and of course, our restorative yoga tonight. I also wanted to thank our interpreters and our captioners, Andrea, Sandra, Javi, Mel, and Marika, again, for continuing to make our event more accessible. And before we go, we want to congratulate Nkiru Nawulezi, PhD, for receiving the Linda E. Saltzman Investigator Award. It's an award presented at each of our conferences to recognize an outstanding new investigator working in the field of IPV, sexual violence, teen dating violence, human trafficking, and their intersections with health and public health. So hopefully in the opening slides, you noticed we had additional information about that award. Dr. Nawulezi is an assistant professor of community psychology at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. We give this award in honor of Dr. Linda Saltzman, who worked as the senior scientist at the CDC in their Division of Violence Prevention. She initiated numerous studies highlighting the public health surveillance and health outcomes of domestic and sexual violence. Dr. Nawulezi's work stood out in a competitive pool of applicants that were reviewed by Futures Without Violence, the CDC, Reliance, and a committee of experts. You can check out her groundbreaking work on reimagining an intersectional IPV response, which is actually going to be presented in our next concurrent session. And it's called I Don't Trust Anyone Again, Mandatory Reporting Laws, Help Seeking and Radically Reimagining an Intersectional Intimate Partner Violence Response. We also have a great interview between one of our staff members, Anissa Ali, and Dr. Nawulezi, where she talks more about her work. So with that, I'm going to sign off from emceeing today. Hopefully I'll see you in a Zoom room later. And tomorrow for our closing keynote, it's an exciting session that you definitely don't want to miss. Now I will close us out with a performance by Sana. Thanks everyone, see you tomorrow.
Hi, my name is Hannah Mundia.
And my name is Angela Wee.
We are both violinists at the Juilliard School in New York City and the co-founders of SANA. SANA is an organization that offers solace to Asian female survivors of gender-based violence and cultural solidarity through the power of music. We partner with organizations throughout the city and throughout the United States to perform concerts which feature works by Asian female composers to facilitate exchange and understanding. As New Yorkers with Asian heritage, I am Japanese and Pakistani.
And as a South Korean American, we embrace cultural diversity and believe this solidarity allows for a sense of community, empowerment, support, and belonging.
We are so honored and grateful to be a part of Futures Without Violence's mission to help survivors and to increase awareness on this issue. We will be performing the third movement from the Sonata No. 5 in E minor for 2 violins by Jean-Marie Leclerc. Leclerc was an 18th century French violinist and composer. In this movement, you will hear the uplifting, lively, and rhythmic energies, as well as the beautiful simplicity expressed in her lyrical lines. The 2 violins are constantly conversing back and forth and are often in call and response dialogue.
It has been a joy to put this together. We hope you enjoy.
Thank you.